Hana pressed her face against the cold metal of the ship window and watched the giant alien warship get closer and closer. The ship was huge, much bigger than anything she had ever seen before. It was black and silver with sharp edges that looked like teeth. The alien ship had so many weapons that she could not count them all. The training ship. Morning Star felt very small compared to the monster approaching them. Hana could hear the other students talking in worried voices behind her. They came from different planets and different species, but they all sounded scared. The bug-like student from Thraxis was making clicking sounds with his mouth. The crystal student from Zephyr was getting dimmer and dimmer like a light going out, even. The big strong student from Martok was breathing heavy. Commander Park Deho walked onto the bridge. His uniform was neat and clean, but his face looked tired. He had been training students for many years. He had seen this exercise hundreds of times. Before he knew exactly what would happen next, the alien ship would demand surrender. The students would learn that sometimes you cannot win. Sometimes you have to give up. The commander turned on the speaking system so everyone on the ship could hear him. His voice was calm but sad. Listen carefully, all students. This is your final test before graduation. The situation is simple. We are facing the Velkari battleship Death Edge. They have more weapons than us. They have stronger shields than us. They have more soldiers than us. The Velkari commander will ask us to surrender. This lesson is about knowing when you cannot win. Hana turned away from the window to look at her fellow students. They were all nodding their heads in agreement. The Thraxian student clicked his mouthparts faster. The Zephyrian student became even dimmer. The Martok student lowered his big head in shame. None of them wanted to surrender, but they all understood that sometimes fighting would only make things worse. But Hana looked back at the enemy ship with different eyes. While everyone else saw certain death, she saw something else. She saw patterns. The Velkari ship moved in the same way over and over again. Their weapons pointed in predictable directions. They flew in straight lines because they thought no one would dare attack them. Their confidence made them careless. Hana began counting the weapons on the enemy ship. She memorized where the blind spots were. She watched how long it took for their patrol pattern to repeat. She studied the energy readings on her screen and noticed something interesting. The big scary ship was not as strong as it looked. Commander Park walked over to her station. Cadet Lee, you will send our surrender message to the Velkari commander. Tell them we give up. Tell them we want safe passage for all our students. Hana picked up the communication device. Her fingers moved toward the surrender button. But then she stopped. She looked at the data on her screen. Again, the enemy ship had a secret. The readings showed something that made her smile, a small, quiet smile that would have worried anyone who really knew humans. Instead of pressing the surrender button, Hana activated the ship's scanning systems. She began a deep search of the enemy vessel. What she found made her smile grow bigger. The Death Edge was not the powerful warship it pretended to be. The ship was running on emergency power only. The shields that looked so strong were actually weak and being supported by fake holographic projections. The weapons that seemed so dangerous were drawing power from other systems to work properly. The engine had problems and needed to restart every few minutes. The life support system was being used to power extra weapons. Hana realized that the Velkari ship was like a person wearing armor made of paper. It looked scary from far away, but up close it was fragile. The enemy was putting on a show, hoping that other ships would surrender without fighting. They were bluffing like a poker player with bad cards. Commander Park, Hana said, turning away from her screen. I need 5 minutes before we surrender. The commander looked confused. Cadet, there is nothing to talk about. This exercise teaches us to accept defeat with honor. But Hana was already working on her computer. Her fingers moved quickly across the controls. Sir, please look at their engine readings. The Velkari ship is not running at full power. Those shields are not real. They are holograms covering up weak spots. The other students moved closer to see what she was showing them. Hana pointed to different parts of the enemy ship on her screen. See this shaking every 47 seconds. That means their reactor has problems. And here their right-side weapons are stealing power from the air recycling system. Commander Park frowned as he studied the information. Even if that is true, Cadet, They still have much more firepower than we do. Not if we do not fight the way. They expect us to fight, Hana replied. She brought up a map showing all the space around both ships. The area was full of broken pieces from old battles. Metal chunks and destroyed ship parts floated everywhere. We do not need to destroy them, we just need to get close to them. The Thraxian student made nervous clicking sounds. Humans always think they can do impossible things. This is why your people die so much in space battles, Hana grinned, showing her teeth. That is exactly why this might work. They expect us to surrender because that is what smart people do. They will not expect an attack from a ship that should be giving up. She explained her plan quickly. The Morning Star would hide behind the floating metal pieces. They would turn off most of their systems and fly very quietly. While the Velkari waited for a surrender message, they would sneak around to the back of the enemy ship. The engine area had damaged sensors that created a small gap where they could not see anything. That is suicide, whispered the Zephyrian student, her crystal body flickering with fear. That is human, Hana corrected, and they will never see it coming. Commander Park studied the plan on the screen. His face changed from doubt to surprise to something. That might have been respect. Cadet Lee, this plan breaks 17 different military rules. Yes, sir. Should I send our surrender now? The commander looked at his eager student, then at the alien ship that thought they were harmless, then back at the information showing the enemy was weaker than they pretended. He thought about all the times humans had won battles they should have lost. He thought about how his people never gave up even when giving up made sense. You have your 5 minutes. Cadet, make them count. Hana nodded and began preparing for the most dangerous 5 minutes of her life. She would show the galaxy that humans did not surrender. Just because the odds were bad, she would prove that sometimes the craziest plan was the only plan that could work. The other students watched in amazement and terror as their human classmate prepared to do something that every military textbook said was impossible. But they were beginning to understand that humans did not read the same textbooks as everyone else. The Velkari ship Death Edge continued its slow patrol, completely unaware that a small human girl was about to turn their perfect ambush into their worst nightmare. Hana moved quickly around the bridge of the Morning Star. Her fingers danced across different control panels as she gathered more information about the enemy ship. The other students watched her with wide eyes. They had never seen anyone work so fast or with such focus. It was like watching a machine that never got tired or made mistakes. The Thraxian student clicked his mouth parts together nervously. He had studied human behavior in his xenobiology classes. Humans were supposed to be emotional and irrational creatures who made decisions based on feelings instead of logic. But this human was calculating everything with cold precision, like the best military computer's commander. Park stood behind Hana watching her work. He had trained thousands of students from dozens of different species. He knew the signs of panic and fear and desperation. But what he saw in this young human was something else entirely. It was confidence mixed with excitement, like she was solving a puzzle instead of facing certain death. Show me what you found, Cadet, the commander said quietly. Hana pulled up a 3-dimensional image of the Velkari ship on the main screen. Different parts of the ship glowed in different colors. Red areas showed weapon systems. Yellow areas showed shield generators. Blue areas showed engine components. Green areas showed life support systems. Look at the power distribution, Hana said, pointing to lines of energy flowing through the ship. A normal warship spreads power evenly across all systems. But the Death Edge is pushing almost everything into weapons and shields. The engines are barely getting enough power to maintain orbit. She highlighted a section near the back of the ship. Their main reactor should be producing 10,000 energy units per minute. But these readings show only 6,000 units. That means they are running on backup power, or their main reactor is damaged. The Zephyrian student flickered brighter with interest. How can you tell the difference between backup power and damage? Hana smiled and pointed to another part of the display. The power fluctuations happen in a regular pattern. Every 47 seconds, the energy drops by 15%, for exactly 3 seconds. If it was backup power, the drops would be random, but this pattern means their reactor is restarting itself over and over again. Commander Park studied the data more carefully. He had been in real battles against Velkari ships before. They were known for their overwhelming firepower and nearly indestructible shields. But this ship looked nothing like the monsters he remembered from the war. Even if their reactor is damaged, they still have enough weapons to turn us into dust. Not if we do not give them a clear target, Hana replied. She zoomed in on the area around both ships, showing all the floating debris from ancient battles. All this metal and wreckage will block their sensors if we stay close to it. We can use the debris field like a forest. Animals hide behind trees to avoid predators. The Martok student growled deep in his throat. His people were warriors who believed in facing enemies with strength and honor. This sounds like coward tactics, hiding behind rocks instead of fighting with courage. Hana turned to look at the big alien warrior. There is nothing cowardly about using your brain instead of your muscles. My people have a saying, the best victory is the one where nobody has to die. She brought up historical records on her screen, showing famous human military victories. Humans have won battles by hiding in trees, by digging tunnels, by pretending to retreat, by using the weather as a weapon. We do not always fight the way our enemies expect us to fight. The display showed image after image of human conflicts, ancient warriors using the sun to blind their enemies, naval battles won by sailing into storms that larger ships could not survive, mountain fighters who knew every cave and hidden path, urban warfare where knowledge of the city layout mattered more than heavy weapons. Your species fights dirty, the Thraxian observed with something that might have been admiration. We fight smart. Hana corrected. When you are smaller and weaker than your enemy, you have to be more clever. Every human child learns this. We cannot always win with strength, so we win with planning. Commander Park was studying the tactical display more carefully. The debris field was thick with chunks of metal, some as large as shuttlecraft. The pieces moved in slow, lazy orbits around the gas giant below, creating an ever-changing maze of hiding spots. This could actually work. The Velkari rely on long-range sensors to track targets. If we stay close to the debris, their targeting systems will have trouble locking onto us. But how do we get close enough to do any damage? Asked the Zephyrian student. Their shields may be weak, but they still exist. Hana grinned and pulled up detailed schematics of Velkari ship design. We do not attack. Their shields, we go around them. Every ship has blind spots, areas where sensors cannot see clearly. The Death Edge has sensor damage on their port engine section, probably from whatever battle damaged their reactor. She highlighted a small area near the back of the enemy ship. If we approach from below and behind, staying in the sensor shadow, we can get within 50 meters of their hull without triggering any alarms. And then what? Commander Park asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. Then I go aboard and introduce myself, Hana said casually, as if she was talking about visiting friends for dinner instead of infiltrating an enemy warship. The bridge went completely silent. Every student and officer stared at the small human girl who had just suggested the most insane plan they had ever heard. A solo boarding action against a ship with over 200 crew members was beyond reckless. It was impossible. Absolutely not, Commander Park said firmly. Cadet, you are not boarding an entire Velkari warship by yourself. I am not going to fight them, Hana explained patiently. I am going to make friends with them. She pulled up her personal equipment list on the screen. Most of it looked like standard infiltration gear, magnetic clamps, electronic lockpicks, portable computers. But mixed in with the technical equipment were things that made no sense. Cooking supplies, spice containers, portable heating units. Humans have been ending wars with food for thousands of years, Hana said. When people share a meal together, it is hard to stay enemies. Time to teach the Velkari about human hospitality. The other students exchanged glances. None of their species had military tactics that involved cooking. Nobody had ever won a battle by offering to make dinner for the enemy. But they were beginning to understand that human logic worked differently than everyone else. Commander Park looked at his student, then at the enemy ship, then at the debris field. that could hide their approach. He thought about every regulation that said this plan was impossible. Then he thought about every human victory that had been impossible until it happened. "You have exactly 30 minutes before they expect our surrender," he said quietly. "Make them count." Hana nodded and headed for the equipment locker, already planning her menu. The Morning Star went completely dark, like a ghost ship floating in the emptiness of space. All the lights turned off. The heating system stopped working. The air recycling slowed down to barely breathe. The only sounds were the quiet hum of life, support running on emergency power, and the soft breathing of scared alien students. Hana sat at the pilot controls, her hands steady on the manual steering system. No computers could help her now. Computer systems made noise that enemy sensors could. Detect everything had to be done by hand, using only her eyes and her instincts to guide the ship through the dangerous debris field. The alien students gathered around her station, watching in amazement as she piloted their ship through gaps that seemed impossibly narrow. Chunks of twisted metal floated past the windows, some so close they could touch the hull. The remains of ancient starships created a maze of hiding spots, but also deadly obstacles that could crush their small vessel. The Thraxian student clicked his mouthparts very quietly. "How do you see the safe path through all this wreckage? The pieces are moving and spinning. Everything changes every second." Hana kept her eyes focused on the space ahead of them. Her hands made tiny adjustments to their course, avoiding collision by mere centimeters. "I do not calculate the math in my head. I feel where the ship needs to go. Humans call it gut instinct, but really it is pattern recognition working faster than thinking." Guided them past a huge piece of hull plating that was tumbling end over end. The metal chunk was as big as their entire ship, but Hana slipped around it like water flowing around a rock. Her movements were smooth and confident, as if she had practiced this exact maneuver 1,000 times before. Behind them, the Velkari warship Death Edge continued its slow patrol pattern. The enemy crew was getting impatient, waiting for a surrender message. They had sent 4 demands already, each one more angry than the last. Soon they would realize that something was wrong, but by then the Morning Star would be in position. Commander Park watched Hana work with growing amazement. He had seen the best pilots in the galaxy fly through asteroid fields and debris zones, but none of them moved with this kind of natural grace. It was like watching a bird navigate through a forest or a fish swim through coral reefs. The human girl seemed to know exactly where every piece of wreckage would be before it got there. "Where did you learn to fly like this?" the commander asked quietly. "My home planet has 3 moons." Hana replied without taking her eyes off the navigation. "The gravity fields create moving debris clouds that change every day if you want. To travel between cities, you have to learn to read the patterns children start practicing when they are 8 years old." The Zephyrian student flickered with curiosity. "What happens if you make a mistake?" "You die," Hana said simply. "So you learn not to make mistakes." A massive piece of engine wreckage drifted directly into their path. The chunk of metal was spinning slowly, creating a wall of death that seemed to block every possible route. Hana studied it for exactly 3 seconds, then made a decision that terrified everyone watching. She accelerated directly toward the spinning wreckage. The Martok student growled in fear. "Human, what are you doing?" "Trust me," Hana said calmly. At the last possible second, she rolled their ship 90 degrees and slipped through a gap between 2 spinning pieces of metal. The gap was barely wider than their ship, and it only existed for about 2 seconds, but Hana had seen it coming and timed their approach perfectly. They emerged on the other side unharmed, while the alien student sat in stunned silence. They had just watched their human pilot thread a needle while blindfolded and riding a roller coaster. "How did you know that gap would be there?" Commander Park asked. "The spin rate was constant and the debris pieces were locked in gravitational resonance," Hana explained. "Simple orbital mechanics. Once you know the pattern, you can predict where the openings will appear." She made it sound easy, but everyone on the bridge knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The mathematical calculations required to predict that gap would have taken a supercomputer several minutes to process. But Hana had done it all in her head in less than 3 seconds. The Morning Star continued its silent journey through the debris field, using every piece of wreckage as cover. Hana found paths that did not exist on any navigation chart. She squeezed their ship through spaces that sensors said were too small. She avoided Velkari. Patrol sweeps by hiding behind chunks of metal at exactly the right moments. The enemy ship grew larger and larger in their viewports until it filled the entire sky. The Death Edge was massive and intimidating with weapon turrets that could vaporize, planets and armor plating thick enough to stop nuclear missiles. But Hana was not intimidated. She had found its weakness and now she was going to exploit it. Approaching the target zone, she whispered. The Morning Star reached the aft section of the Velkari warship, sliding into the sensor shadow like a ghost ship returning to haunt its killers. The damage detection arrays created a blind spot just large enough for a small vessel to approach without being noticed. Hana brought them to a complete stop, floating in the void only 50 meters from the enemy hull. Here in the shadow of the great warship, everything was quiet and still. The metal surface of the Death Edge stretched away in all directions like a gray landscape of armor, plating, and weapon mounts. Emergency lights blinked slowly along maintenance corridors. The soft glow from portholes showed that the enemy crew was going about their normal duties, completely unaware that humans had arrived. Now what? Commander Park asked in the barest whisper. Hana was already putting on her spacesuit, checking her equipment pack, and testing her magnetic clamps. Now I go make some new friends and teach them about human cooking. Absolutely not, Cadet. You are not boarding that ship alone. I am not going there to fight the entire crew, Hana said patiently as she sealed her helmet. I am going to the kitchen to start dinner. Human food has been ending wars and making friends for thousands of years. Time to show the Velkari what they have been missing. She held up her equipment pack, which seemed much too heavy for normal infiltration gear. The other students could see cooking supplies and spice containers, mixed in with electronic tools and magnetic clamps. Humans win. Wars with friendship, food, and kindness, Hana explained. Much more effective than weapons and much harder to defend against. Before anyone could stop her, she activated the airlock and stepped out into the cold vacuum of space carrying supplies. That would change everything. Hana moved carefully along the hull of the enemy warship in the cold darkness of space. Her magnetic boots clicked softly against the metal surface as she searched for a way inside. The Death Edge was enormous and covered with weapons that could destroy cities, but Hana was not afraid. She had a plan that no Velkari warrior would ever expect. She found what she was looking for near the engine section, a small maintenance airlock used by repair crews when the ship needed fixing. Her electronic toolkit contained devices that would have impressed the best thieves in the galaxy. Lockpicks that could open any door, computer viruses that could fool any security system, signal jammers that could make cameras forget what they saw. The Velkari security systems were designed to stop armies of enemy soldiers. They were built to resist massive cyber attacks and explosive charges, but they were not prepared for one small human girl with patience and clever fingers. Hana worked quietly and carefully, taking apart their defenses piece by piece. Within 10 minutes, she was inside the enemy ship, breathing recycled air and listening to alien voices echoing through the metal corridors. The Velkari were talking in their own language, but Hana had studied their speech patterns. Their voices sounded confident and bored, like guards who never expected any real trouble. She moved through service tunnels and maintenance shafts, avoiding the main corridors where armed Velkari warriors walked their patrols. The ship was huge with thousands of rooms and passages, but Hana had memorized the layout before boarding. She knew exactly where she needed to go. The Velkari were reptilian creatures that looked like walking crocodiles with hands. They were proud and aggressive, with a culture built around strength and military honor. They respected enemies who fought bravely in direct combat. They had no respect for trickery or sneaky tactics, which was exactly why Hana's plan would work perfectly. Her destination was the ship's food preparation area, not to poison the crew, but to do something far more dangerous. She was going to cook for them. The galley was exactly what she expected to find. Nutrition dispensers that produced the same bland, colorless paste 3 times every day. The Velkari military believed that enjoying food was a sign of weakness. Real warriors ate for fuel, only not for pleasure. Their meals had no taste, no variety, no joy. Hana unpacked her supplies and smiled. The human girl had brought spices from Earth that could transform the most boring ingredients into something magical. She had portable cooking equipment that could work in any kitchen. She had recipes passed down through generations of human families who understood that food was love made visible. She began to work quietly and efficiently. The ship's basic protein paste became the foundation for something wonderful. She added herbs that had grown in Earth soil under an alien sun. She mixed spices that had been traded across 100 star systems. She used techniques that human grandmothers had taught to human children for thousands of years. The smells began almost immediately, rich and complex aromas that filled the air with promises of satisfaction and comfort. The scents drifted through the ventilation system, carrying messages that spoke to genetic memories buried deep in Velkari DNA. Their ancestors had once cooked with love and care before their culture decided that such things were weakness. The first crew member to investigate was a young warrior named Korth. He was drawn by smells that triggered something ancient in his brain, something his people had forgotten, but his body remembered. He followed the aromas like a hunting animal following a trail until he reached the galley. What he found there made no sense. A small human female was standing over a heating unit stirring something that smelled better than anything he had ever encountered. He was completely unarmed and seemed unaware that she was surrounded by enemies. She looked up when he entered and smiled as if she was greeting an old friend. Human. Korth growled, raising his plasma rifle. You will surrender immediately and explain how you got aboard this ship? Hana looked at the weapon, then at the confused young warrior holding it. She reached for a small bowl and filled it with her creation. The steam rising from the bowl carried scents that made Korth's mouth water, despite himself. Try this first, she said, holding out the bowl. Then I will surrender and answer all your questions. Korth stared at the offering. His military training said this could be poison. His warrior culture said accepting food from an enemy was shameful. His weapon was pointed at her heart, and he could end this threat with one shot. But the smell coming from that bowl was calling to something deeper than training or culture. This could be poison, he said uncertainly. It could be, Hana agreed, cheerfully. But it smells really good, does it not? Against every regulation and all common sense. Korth lowered his weapon and accepted the bowl. His hand shook slightly as he lifted the spoon to his mouth. The moment the food touched his tongue, his world changed completely. Flavors exploded across his senses, rich and layered and satisfying in ways he had never imagined possible. The military paste he had eaten for years tasted like cardboard compared to this. The spices danced on his tongue, telling stories of distant worlds and ancient traditions. The meat was tender and flavorful instead of tough and bland. What is this? He whispered, taking another spoonful. Then another. Beef stew, Hana replied, with potatoes and carrots and about 12 different spices. My grandmother taught me the recipe when I was 7 years old. Would you like to learn how to make it? Korth nodded without thinking, his warrior training forgotten in the face of this miraculous discovery. How is such flavor possible? I did not know food could taste like this. Your people used to cook like this, Hana said gently. Before you decided that enjoying meals was weakness, before you forgot that sharing food is how families and friends show love for each other, she began teaching him the recipe, explaining each ingredient and its purpose. Korth listened with the intensity of a student learning sacred knowledge. He had spent his life believing that food was just fuel, that pleasure in eating was shameful. But this human was showing him that his entire culture had thrown away something precious. Why are you teaching me this? He asked. I am your enemy. No, Hana said, stirring another pot. You are just someone who has forgotten how good life can be when you take time to enjoy simple pleasures. Food is meant to bring people together, not just keep them alive. More crew members began arriving, drawn by the incredible smells drifting through the ship. They came expecting to find their shipmate fighting, an intruder. Instead, they found him learning to cook while a small human girl patiently explained the difference between herbs and spices. One by one, the Velkari warriors put down their weapons, and picked up cooking utensils. 2 hours later, the bridge of the Velkari warship was in complete chaos. Commander Threx sat in his captain chair staring at reports that made no sense at all. Half of his crew had stopped responding to orders. The other half were demanding to know why their friends had abandoned their posts. The ship that was supposed to be the most disciplined vessel in the Velkari fleet was falling apart, sir. His communications officer reported, "Engineering section is not responding to calls. Weapons control says they are too busy to talk. Security teams report strange smells coming from the galley area." Commander Threx stood up, his scaled face dark with anger. "What do you mean, too busy? The human prisoner escaped somehow and my crew is too busy to catch her? Sir, I think you need to see this for yourself." Threx stormed through the corridors of his ship, expecting to find his warriors fighting a desperate battle against human infiltrators. Instead, he found something that shattered his understanding of military discipline. His crew members were laughing, actually laughing like children at play instead of soldiers at war. The sounds were coming from the galley area, where half his crew had gathered around tables covered with food that looked nothing like regulation military rations. The air was filled with smells that made his mouth water despite his anger. His warriors were eating with obvious joy, talking excitedly about something called seasoning and arguing about whether bread or rice was better. At the center of it all was the human prisoner. A small girl who should have been in chains was instead teaching his soldiers how to flip something round and flat in a metal pan. His crew was cheering when she succeeded, and laughing when the food flew too high and stuck to the ceiling. "What is the meaning of this?" Threx roared in his most commanding voice. The entire galley went silent as his warriors turned to face their captain. But instead of showing shame or fear, they looked excited like they had discovered something wonderful. Several of them approached him carrying plates of food that smelled incredible. Junior Officer Korth stepped forward holding a bowl of something that steamed and bubbled. "Commander, you must try. This, the human calls it soup, and it has changed my entire understanding of what food can be. My grandmother used to tell stories about meals like this from before the Great Discipline, when our people cared more about flavor than efficiency." "She is a prisoner," Threx shouted. "You, our warriors, act like soldiers, not like younglings at a feast." But even as he spoke, Threx found his attention drawn to the small human at the center of it all. She was not cowering in fear or begging for mercy. Instead, she was calmly stirring something in a large pot, while his crew watched her every move with fascination. She looked up and met his eyes with a confidence that should have been impossible for a captive. "Commander Threx," Hana said, approaching, with a steaming bowl. "I believe we need to discuss new terms for this situation." "Terms?" Threx snarled. "You are my prisoner. You have no position from which to negotiate anything." Hana gestured around the galley where Velkari warriors were now arguing about whether garlic or onions made food taste better. "Sir, I have successfully captured your entire crew using nothing but cooking lessons and spice blends. They are not going to let you send me back to my ship." As if to prove her point, several Velkari warriors immediately began protesting loudly. The idea of losing their human chef made them more upset than any battle alarm ever had. They crowded around their commander demanding that he negotiate to keep the human girl on their ship permanently. "This is ridiculous," Threx sputtered. "We are a military vessel with important duties. You cannot abandon your post to play with food." "We are not playing," Korth said seriously. "The human has reminded us of something we lost long ago. Our ancestors believed that sharing good food was sacred, that cooking with care was an act of love. We gave up that wisdom to become better warriors. But what good is winning battles if we forget how to live?" Hana offered Commander Threx the bowl she was holding. "Try the chicken soup. Your people used to make something very similar before you decided that enjoying meals was weakness instead of strength." Threx looked at the bowl, then at his crew, then back at the impossible human girl who had somehow conquered his ship without firing a single shot. The logical part of his mind said this was enemy trickery designed to weaken his forces, but the smell rising from that bowl spoke to memories buried so deep he had forgotten they existed. He took the bowl and tasted it carefully. The first spoonful made him close his eyes as flavors washed over his tongue like warm sunlight after a long, cold winter. It tasted like childhood, like safety, like a time when his people had cared about more than just duty and discipline. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. "How did you know what we had lost?" "Because humans went through the same thing," Hana replied gently. "We had a period in our history when we thought strength meant giving up joy, when we believed that caring about beauty and flavor and comfort made us weak. It almost destroyed us as a people. We learned that real strength comes from protecting the things that make life worth living." She gestured to his crew, who were now sharing recipes and laughing together like family members instead of just soldiers. "Your warriors are not weaker because they enjoy good food. They are stronger because they remember why they fight, to protect a way of life that includes simple pleasures and shared happiness." Commander Threx looked around his galley, seeing his crew in a new way. They were still fierce warriors capable of defending their ship and their people, but now they were also complete beings who understood that victory meant more than just defeating enemies. It meant preserving the good things that made civilization worth protecting. "What do you propose?" he asked. "A cultural exchange." Hana said, "I teach your people to cook with love and creativity. You teach my people about Velkari honor and discipline. We learn from each other instead of fighting each other." 3 hours later, Commander Park received a message that would become legendary in military academies across the galaxy. The Velkari ship, Death Edge, was requesting permission to dock with the Morning Star, not to accept surrender but to begin the first joint human Velkari cooking class in galactic history. The training exercise was officially declared a draw, though everyone agreed that Cadet Hana had achieved something unprecedented. She had not destroyed an enemy ship or forced their surrender through violence. Instead, she had reminded an entire crew that they were people first and warriors second. 6 months later, the Velkari military added cooking classes to their basic training. Peace negotiations between humans and Velkari proceeded smoothly, with most diplomatic meetings centered around shared meals. The Death Edge became a mobile cultural center where young beings from both species learned that the best victories were the ones where everyone won, and in the galley that had started it all, Hana continued teaching anyone who would listen that sometimes the best way to end a war was to invite your enemies to dinner.